This is Wendy Halley, and you're listening to Lucid Cafe. Hello, friends. Thanks for checking out my podcast. And if you're a regular listener, thanks for your patience. This episode is being released much later than I would have liked. Life's been a bit hectic, but productive. The good news is that I was not only able to find a more affordable and large enough space to reopen my wellness center post-flood, but the new space is on the 3rd floor. Ha! If a future flood makes it to the 3rd floor in downtown Montpelier, Vermont, I think we're all pretty much screwed. So we've got a lot to do in the coming weeks to get the space ready before the Harmonic Ellipse, my new state-of-the-art sound and light energy therapy chamber, is delivered. I keep seeing myself diving into the chamber head first once it's assembled and ready to work its magic. It's been an intense 6 months. All right, so my guest, Lyon Folsom, is the author of the new book, Soul Statements, A Love Coach's Guide to Successful Communication. In this episode, we talk about communication and intimacy, the nature of soul statements, and his work as a love coach. A little about Corey. He's been a professional tracker, so watch out, a wilderness guide for newly sober people, and a vision quest leader. After experiencing a spiritual soul awakening, he was inspired to become a tantra teacher. And in 2012, he began his work as a relationship and intimacy coach. Corey helps people from all over the world remove blocks to love and increase the potency with which they show up for life. So please enjoy my conversation with Lyon Folsom. Corey, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
We're recording this in September, and your book just released.
Indeed, it did, the 19th.
Okay, it's called Soul Statements, A Love Coach's Guide to Successful Communication. So before we get into your book, I'd love to hear some of your backstory, like what inspired you to get on the path of becoming a love coach and then eventually writing this book.
Sure. Well, I was definitely not the person anyone would have predicted who would become a coach of any kind. I was the super shy kid who had his nose in books all through primary and secondary school. In fact, I was so shy that it was well after high school by the time I actually talked to a girl.
Oh,
Yeah. I liked them. I just didn't know how to say hi.
it is not an easy thing, the whole dating world. It's not an easy thing. And
Yeah.
I feel for anyone who's super shy.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
can relate. I'm a pretty shy person myself.
Yeah. It can be a big hurdle. So as life went on, I wondered why life wasn't as awesome as I expected it should be, given I was such a good person. And as I got into adult relationships, I didn't have a good resource of communication skills to draw upon. I had my family of origin as my model, as we all did. And so it was a learn as you go. And not all the lessons were easy or fun. But eventually, I met people who helped me out along the way and modeled healthy communication for me. And I learned and I learned and I fell not expecting to, but I ended up in a tantra workshop, and that just changed my entire outlook. And it felt like I came back to the essential me, and I discovered how amazing and powerful it is just to sit in silence and also to sit in silence and just gaze at another person and have them gazing at you. And
Talk
it
about
was
intimacy, right?
right, and to me you see. And so, and from that I hired a relationship coach, and he led me along, helped me digest things that were happening in my life and extract the lessons from them in appropriate ways. And so for a couple of years, very intensely working with him, I grew as a man, as a human being, and gained a lot more communication skills. And then people were asking me for help with, maybe it was a couple who wanted to return to intimacy after a bit of a drought. That happened, and just other people wanting up level their own experience of life. And so that just led to me becoming a coach. And eventually I heard myself telling people a lot of similar things, which made me think, oh, I should write this down, because I had a blog at the time. And so I thought, well, I'll blog about this. And so I started writing, and the blog was never happened because I realized it should be a book. And so Soul Statements emerged.
Okay, so what was it, do you think, about you that was inspiring people to sort of ask you for some assistance? Like, what were they seeing, or what was happening?
Yeah, I think that, I met people in workshops such as nonviolent communication, and then and conscious communication is another one. And so they saw me living my life with a measure of ease in the romantic and friendship realms. And so they said, I want some of what he has. He's been a little farther along than me in this arena. And so I was asked to help.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've been doing a lot of study around communication then.
Yeah.
If it's okay for a moment to explore that, I'm curious, what was it about your shyness that, I mean, so there's shyness, like, I want to speak to somebody,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I just don't have the courage. And then there's shyness in I don't know how to speak to someone, so I don't even want
Yeah.
to approach that. How did it work for you, do you think?
Well, I absolutely had both going on.
Okay.
And so later in life, when I learned more of the how, I also had experiences that got me in touch with my own center. And I got to really not just know, but really feel and believe that I had something to offer, that I had a right to live on this earth and occupy a certain space. I had my sovereignty, and my desires for companionship or whatever were gifts and to be honored.
Okay. Your book, this is your first book, it sounds like, yeah?
Indeed, it is.
Well, congratulations. That's a big deal, right?
Yeah, a
Um,
milestone.
yeah, no kidding. All right. So you've been working as a love coach for how long?
Since 2012, so 10 or 11 years.
And then you've been gathering data and information and wisdom that you've acquired over those years, and you've put them all in this book. And your book is really like, to me, it's about relationship, but there's a good portion of the book that's about your relationship with yourself.
Yes,
Can you talk a little bit about why you think that's important in this process of learning how to communicate?
right. So my coaching practice, I call it core relationship coaching, not just because my name is Corey, but because your relationship with yourself is a core relationship, as are your immediate people in your sphere, your loved ones, and cherished people. And so, if you don't have a connection to that core, to who you are on the inside, then you run into trouble because there's no center. And also, I have a background in tango dancing, and
No
one of the
kidding.
one of the greatest concepts there is you have to spin around your own center, or around your own axis. And if you try to, as the leader, if you try to follow the follower, it doesn't go well. You have to decide where you stand. You have to know which foot you're weighting at a given moment, and just operate from your own gyroscope, if you will. And then there's the relationship with spirit or the greater spirit. We can think about things that occur in our lives. We can examine experiences and look for the hand of a greater, whether it's guardian angels or God or just your bigger spirit having an effect. That's fine and good. And it's also super beneficial to spend time just being quiet with yourself, with your own thoughts, or just with whatever's deeper than your thoughts, just feeling your own essence. And I like to call it getting still enough to listen to the whisper of your own spirit. And so those kind of practices, or spending some amount of quiet time, ideally in each day, are something I really talk a lot about and emphasize with my clients for sure.
How did you come to that, the idea of sitting in silence and that it being so beneficial?
I think mainly through the tantric exercises. There's what they call white tantra, which is a strictly solo practice, and that's where I started. It was called Ipsalu tantra, and so you're being contained within your own space, and you're feeling the energy move within your own bodily system. So you're connecting to your own heart. You're just moving energy up and down your spine. So that just led to some intimacy, if you will, with, oh, this is me. This is what my heart feels like when I tune into it.
I imagine it's hard to probably put words to that experience, right? You can't tell someone when XYZ happens, that's your spirit that you're connecting with, or your essence, or whatever you want to call it. Unless you have figured out a way, have you?
Well, there's no, you're exactly right that it's not a one size fits all. And that being said, there are techniques, if you will, to create the conditions conducive to that kind of listening. So if you're in a calm environment, you have some time to yourself, even if you're in and amongst the world, you can still put your hand on your heart and just say hello. Like, I acknowledge that this amazing, precious heart that's here. And so you can, there's just a world of techniques and ways to go about it. For most people, it's obviously not realistic to go sit in a cave for 7 years, although some people have done that. But for most of us, it can be just putting a hand on the heart and just feeling.
Right. In your practice, have you been able to determine the difference between your spirit or essence and your sort of mental process?
Yeah,
Like who you think you are, your ego,
that's
whatever you
right.
want to call it.
That's
Yeah.
right. Someone smarter than me said a long time ago that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening. And so the idea is that you're listening, you're stilling the chatter and just being. I actually write a little bit in my book about one of my favorite ways to contact the great silence is to in body surfing in the ocean, where I love to just, as a giant wave comes in, I go down underneath it, and I'm horizontal on the sandy bottom as it rolls over the top. And while I'm down there in the awe of it all, I'm listening. You can just feel this, I don't know, energetic silence, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, as this great force is
Mm.
rolling over you, right? Yeah, it's
Hmm.
like you're in this little pocket of stillness.
That's right.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool analogy. Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff is so ineffable. I guess all you can do is really encourage folks to try to be silent, and that's a tall order for most of us these days, yeah.
Yeah, and everyone will find their own activity that fits for them. I personally have a little space in my home, like a little home altar. And it's basically just where I have some little things that are meaningful to me, a stone that I found at a special time, or maybe some images of saints or masters. And I'll sit in front of that every day and I'll close my eyes and I'll put my palms together and just listen and feel and just try to be still. And when I put my palms together, I'm really bringing myself to this center place. That's what I'm imagining is happening, and so I'm bringing my awareness to the middle, the center. My hands are together over my heart, and I'll just be. And I generally will conclude that time with a soul statement of some type. So I might say, I am enough, or I got this, meaning whatever's going to happen in the day. It's like, in other words, I'm resourced and I can handle whatever comes. And handling whatever comes, for me, a main ingredient in that is a commitment to not abandon your own heart, your own values, what's important to you. And so maybe if someone's not speaking kindly, rather than just suppress and feel bad, to just say it doesn't really work for me to, well, it depends on how confrontational you want to be. You might say, this doesn't feel good right now and I'm needing to take some time to myself. Or you can just say, uh, let's take it down a notch, and could you use a better tone? Or I could hear you better if you would speak a little more kindly. That's a good one.
That's like a showstopper right there. And it
Yeah,
could also trigger the hell out of the person. You never know.
yeah, yeah,
But I think the important thing you're trying to relay here is not to swallow your your true feelings and to be able to find a way to express them so that they don't eat you up. Is that kind of what you're
yeah, yeah, for sure.
suggesting? Okay. And since you alluded to soul statement, and that is the title of your book, can you talk a little bit about what you consider a soul statement and how one might be able to discover what theirs are?
Absolutely. And so a soul statement is a form of affirmation, but it's not a future state that you want to emotionally draw to you. It's a present time reminder of what is already true, what is already and always good about yourself. So some area which you're resourced, maybe you don't always feel that resourced on the surface with the circumstances, but down deep inside of you, there are more resources. And so it's a way to claim a more grounded state because you're aligning yourself with one or more of your strengths. So, for instance, you might say, my heart is a trusted guide, or I can call upon the grit inside of me.
Hmm.
Uh, I am not my story. My distress is not a forever condition. And so you can say all of those or one of those, or and just declare that. And your body, if you're saying something really true about yourself, my experience is that your body will go, oh yeah, that's right. And maybe your cells might even get a little activated, like, yes, there's some truth that's counteracting what I was thinking just a second ago, some doubt or fear or concern, distraction, distress. And you're saying basically, oh yeah, I actually can think something different right now. I can feel something different right now. And then the next best action for me is more available and more obvious because I'm aligning with who I really am.
Yeah, I like that idea of making a statement that's true. And then it sounds like also what it might be doing is resetting your nervous system because if you need to make that statement, then something's amiss inside of you, right? You're off kilter or feeling unsettled or insecure. And by making that statement, you're reminding yourself, like, oh, you aren't the story you were about to tell yourself about yourself.
You're about to
You-
repeat.
yeah, exactly, which is what we do. I mean, I joke all the time, and I'm sure I've said it a million times on this podcast. I really think that human beings are 95 to 99% unconscious when we're awake, that we're just creatures of habit, right? And those stories are so dominant in our psyches, they're just sort of running the show. And so, what you're inviting people to do is to ground in some truth about yourself. And your book, a big portion of it is inviting folks to do some exercises, some journaling and other exercises to find out what those statements are, things that you can say. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And it's not a novel and it's not a workbook. It's something in between where there's just a ton of, oh, here's a journal prompt. You might find it useful to answer this question. I mean, it's just there's several journal prompts, there's several exercises, there's suggestive meditations in each chapter. Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out to me is the idea of being your own best friend.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really,
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't we? Shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
we?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But who
Yeah.
often thinks of that?
Yeah.
Like, that's not in the forefront of your mind of being my own best friend. What is your definition of friendship?
Well, I just want to start by mentioning that if you had another person who spoke to you the way you speak to yourself on the inside, you probably wouldn't be hanging out with them very often.
Very true.
And so,
Yeah, we can be assholes to ourselves for sure.
yeah, and the person that's very critical of others, I guarantee they're even more critical of themselves on the inside. And so we learn to love ourselves, perhaps first by maybe accepting ourselves and maybe forgiveness for past missteps comes into play there at some point. And so the best friend, it's part of living an examined life, if you will. So, in other words, you want to think about what you've done. You want to be honest about your own motivations for doing X or not doing X without being hard on yourself and saying, oh, I did this because I wanted to avoid being embarrassed. So I didn't speak up or I exited or I did whatever. And so that's just information. We're here to learn. And so my favorite teacher in college was a math teacher, and she would give us the test. And then if we wanted to, we could retake the same test just on the answers we didn't get right in order to try to work them through correctly. And then she would count both tests. And so her attitude was, I'm not here to try to give you a bad grade. I want you to see where you could improve, and let's see if we can improve right there.
Actually
And
learn. Yeah.
yeah, and actually not just so, well, I got a bad grade and then you move on to the next section, but let's see if we can get up to speed on whatever wherever we were missing out. So it's a little bit the same when we look at ourselves. It's not because we're getting more ammunition to say I'm less than. It's just, oh, I could do better. I could act better. And if we're in touch with or we've figured out at some point what we value, whether that's contribution or safety or love, then it helps us move more into behaviors that support that are more congruent with what I believe about myself. And
Mm,
so if I believe I'm less than worthy, that's a good area to work on. So that if you feel more more self-worth, then you naturally act better.
right. Yeah. And getting back to the idea of having a friendship with yourself, developing a friendship with yourself. I mean, you don't automatically go right to best friend when you meet someone, right? There's a process you have to go through, and that process is you get to know them. How
Mhm.
much do you have in common? What happens when you hit a bump in the road in your relationship? How do you guys navigate that? I would imagine it's a similar process with yourself. I mean, how well do any of us really know ourselves? Really,
Mhm.
really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
It's like because of all of the, like we're alluding to a little while ago, all the stories we have about ourselves, I would venture to guess that most of them are untrue
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
maybe have a bit of truth to them, but there's a lot of, uh,
Filter.
yeah, well, yeah, a lot of maybe wounding coming through in that storyline instead of looking at yourself. It's so easy to blame someone else who allegedly did something wrong or they slighted you in some way or whatever.
Mhm.
And so to turn that focus from the outside world into the interior world takes a lot of courage. And you
Right.
do talk about that in your book, the idea of needing to have courage. Can you speak to
Mm.
that a little bit?
Yeah,
Courage?
I will. And I want to lead into that by saying it's really incumbent upon each one of us to set the tone for how we expect to be treated. And how can we necessarily expect other people to treat us better than we treat ourselves? And that plays into being your own best friend. You set the standard. And when we're allowing a negative experience to continue, or when we feel bad about ourselves, in NBC, they talk about those moments when we forget our own lovableness. And so
NBC?
yeah, nonviolent communication.
Oh, I thought you said NBC, like the network, the television
Oh,
network. Sorry.
yeah.
Gotcha. Nonviolent communication. Got it. All
Yeah.
right.
And so it's really, if we can remember, if we remind ourselves through soul statements or through just sitting in quiet time, even for a minute each day, or doing something that connects us to ourselves. It could just be going for a walk. Then we have a little more touch with our value, our center. And so that leads into taking a stand, standing up for how I expect to be treated with a measure of kindness or patience or whatever. And the more we have some self-assurance, then it's easier to let the trials and travails of the world just kind of roll past, and we don't get so caught up in, because I know I have a deeper identity than whatever circumstance is occurring.
If you're faced with someone who's being challenging, even if you know yourself really well, it can still be really intimidating and feel like quite a risk to be able to speak out and set boundaries or challenge someone's perspective, stand up for yourself or
Mhm.
whatever. I mean, even if you're a really confident person, it's not the easiest thing for any of us, I think. It's just, it's risky. Unless you're
Mhm.
a sociopath, I think you wouldn't
Yeah,
dare
yeah,
then.
for sure. And so that's where what I call the courage to be clear comes into play. And it absolutely takes courage. And it's usually a little more courage than we're prepared to offer ourselves.
Right,
And
exactly.
but that's what it's all about. That's in those moments of ouch, if we can speak up on behalf of our own heart, our own woundedness, our own hurt feelings, then we can grow in that skill. And at least for me, I had to do it messily at first just to do it in order to get better at it.
I think you're not alone in that. I think we would
And
all be pretty messy in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I had a mentor one time who said to me, and this was a totally mind-blowing concept, which was anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first.
Mm. Yeah. You have to take the risk, or you're just going to sit in your room
Right, right.
and
And then there's
feel bad
another,
for yourself.
absolutely, there's another term I like, and it just, I like these terms because they're shorthand for a greater concept, which will help us go, oh yeah, I need to say something or do something right now in support of my own value or values. And that particular concept is awkward radar. And so if I sense that something feels awkward or tense, that's the moment to say, I'm not sure what I'm sensing, but something seems a little off, or maybe I'm feeling some tension. I'm not sure. Perhaps you could let me know what's going on with you, or I'm just wondering where this tone in your voice is coming from or something. And so however we do it, if we start speaking up on in defense of or on behalf of our own feelings that we don't want to feel, then we learn and we grow in skill at it.
It sounds like you're also suggesting that people be curious rather than making an assumption about what this person has going on or what you're perceiving. You just sort of be curious. Is there something going on with you? Is that what
That's
you're?
right. That's a huge and productive strategy versus saying, "Oh, I know what's happening. This person's obviously angry." Well, if someone tells me I'm angry, that's probably inaccurate. Maybe I'm feeling rushed, and so I'm acting more tense, and
Well,
maybe
and
I'm,
no
you
one
know,
wants to be told how they're feeling,
yeah.
right?
And
I mean,
so
it never goes over
it's
well.
right. You're verbally pointing a finger and going, "Oh, I know," and well, maybe, probably you don't. And so, how much
Yeah,
less
from
defensive usually a person get is it's easier to be less defensive, shall we say, when it's a question, hey, what's going on with you right now? Versus pointing a verbal finger and telling them, naming what you think their state is. Yeah, it makes for an easier next bit of conversation.
so curiosity, good way to
Mhm,
go.
mhm.
Don't
Yeah,
make assumptions.
right, right. And I know personally when I'm feeling unhappy, it's generally because I'm focused on me. And oh, I'm not experiencing what I want to experience. Oh, I'm doing something right now that I'd rather not be doing versus, oh, someone's asked me to help them with something and maybe it doesn't feel important to me and I'm like, why are we even doing this? But then I if I just give myself a half a second to go, they have their own beautiful reason and their own motivation. And this is actually an opportunity to be kind and just to help for a minute. That's okay. And
Mm,
so if I can realize I'm not the only person in the room, I'm not the only person with desires and impulses and needs, all to the acting better.
right. What's going through my mind as you're talking is the other element, which I'm wondering is how much of a role it's playing in these exchanges. And those of us who really struggle with communication and maybe self-esteem stuff. I think everyone has degrees of low self-esteem. We're all struggling with that. It's pretty universal.
Mhm.
But the ability to communicate, it is an art form, as my husband is fond of saying. It's amazing that any of us can understand each other at all. It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. But I'm wondering about the sensitivity factor, like how sensitive a person is, whether, like, you strike me as someone you seem like a sensitive guy, especially if that sensitivity is around empathy, like be feeling very empathic and perceiving how other people are feeling very easily and getting tangled up in that and getting overwhelmed maybe. Can you speak to that? Does that make any sense to you?
Well, what you're saying does make sense, but I'm not sure I understand the actual question.
how much sensitivity can play into making communication difficult because of untangling your stuff from someone else's stuff. And then also, when a person is very sensitive, they may take longer to process something
Mhm.
and then may not be ready to talk in that moment because they have to sort of untangle everything and figure out, well, how do I even feel about all of this? I know I'm having feelings, I just haven't been able to identify what they are.
Yeah, that's very insightful, and that happens a lot, very common. And so it's completely valid to figure it out later and then just come back and say, can we just talk about what occurred? And I just want to let you know what was going on for me. And you want to ideally then just share the impact on you. When you were talking really fast and loud, I noticed that I just got really quiet and didn't want to talk. And that's not really how I want to be. And I want to feel more free. And so I'm wondering what was going on for you, and just have a conversation about it. And so you're getting curious, you're sharing your impact, you're not naming their state, you're not telling them they were wrong, you're not critiquing this other person, you're just letting them know what occurred, what the effect on you was, and just hopefully there can be a conversation. And the other thing about sensitivity is we don't have to be sensitive in the way you described in order to benefit from the practices. For instance, I'm just thinking about a coaching call I had yesterday, and this woman is in a relationship with a man, and he has gotten into this habit of texting her, and when they're together, speaking to her about really mundane, trivial things. He wants to maybe go on about the traffic that he experienced on the way to see her. And
Oh, please.
she's like, I want to feel fresh and light and energized. I don't want to hear about your, stupid little problems and distresses that we all have. I have my own. I don't need to hear yours
So
too.
this guy's
And so
complaining? Is that what she's
yeah,
saying?
he doesn't necessarily look at it as complaining. He's just talking.
That's
He's
how
making
she's perceiving it.
conversation, and the subject matter is of a complainy type. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Nice
And
reframe on
so,
that.
yeah, so he's not sensitive to
He's
what's
not reading the
happening.
room.
Yeah. So now she can basically, what worked really well for her is I told her she just doesn't know how to talk to him about it. She's like, I don't want to feel like I'm, mother henning him or mothering him or whatever. So I said, just tell him what helps you, what feeds you, what you like, and model that for him. So, in other words, I want to feel this way. And what helps me is less information and more presence. And I would rather not talk about things like what happened in your day, traffic, whatever. And if we don't have anything to talk about, that's awesome. Let's just be with each other. Let's just sit and feel and be present. So it's
Yeah.
like, I want your presence more than your information, or some form of saying that. So that worked actually really well.
Oh,
So,
good.
so in other words, that was the way she put him on I called it a low information diet. And I told her to say, words help me less, your presence helps me more. Let's
Nice.
emphasize presence. And I didn't, I mean, I said this to her. I don't know if she's going to say it to him or in whatever way, but I said, when you don't know what to say or do, just dial up yourself, dial up your presence, just really be here in the room, be with me. That's what I want.
It's much nicer than saying shut up.
Yeah, yeah. And I had a girlfriend at one point where if I started to wander off in that way, she would take a couple fingertips, and she would just tap my sternum.
Really?
Yeah. And
And
she like,
was that okay for you? Because I think
oh, it was
that would
awesome.
be
It was
annoying
so
for
good.
me.
I didn't want to hear somebody criticize me. I just needed a reminder like, hey,
You're doing it.
come right here. I want you. Be here with me.
Okay.
Tap,
So
tap,
that's how
tap.
you
I was
interpreted
like,
it that
oh,
way.
I'm like self-correct master. I can just like, got it. Bing, I'm here now. And that's what I wanted too. So that was our little code and it worked terrific.
Sounds like you find creative ways to help people move through those sorts of challenges
Mm-hmm.
in a way that doesn't get ugly.
Yeah.
I'm sure that happens on occasion, but all right. So, what is it that you would really like folks to get from reading your book?
Our old stories got us where we are, and new stories will get us where we want to be. And we gain these new stories, these new concepts by contacting our center. That is where each one of us, that's where our answers live. One of my favorite soul statements is, my soul knows what to do. There is a place at my center where I can tune out everything that is not me. And so we're just upgrading the conversation that we have with ourselves. And
I like
so,
that. That's nice.
yeah, thank you. When we're focusing on something that's not working, we can always find something that's not working or that's
Yeah,
not optimal.
we're kind of good at
And
that, aren't we? Yeah.
we are. And I think that that's all goes probably all the way back to our Paleolithic brains where there were short-faced bears and saber-toothed cats and whatever else. And so when we connect to who we really are, we can use that as an anchor to say, no matter what happens, I can handle it because I have a strong and loving heart. My heart is precious and worthy of protection. And when I trust my inner, here's another one. When I trust my inner voice, I have better outcomes. And it is true that we always have a better thought that we could opt into if we look for it. And so it's just about persisting in this practice of focusing on your deepest, most relevant value, and sometimes more quickly, sometimes more slowly, that next best thought will transfer into becoming your default thought.
Mm.
And so that's a beautiful thing. And it's a way of curating that inner playlist. And so many times the thought that comes in is one of catastrophizing, like, oh, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, this could be terrible. And what I do for myself is I actually turn my mouth up into an actual smile. And so I'm smiling with my face. I'm smiling a little bit on the inside with a little bit of self humor and going, oh, wow, I can't believe I'm thinking that again. That is wild. What's actually true is there's a lot right about me, or my deep sureness is more powerful than any of my surface thoughts. And so that's how part of how we get there.
Yeah, I think it's good being able to laugh at yourself, not
Mm-hmm.
in a disparaging way, but in a honest way, like, huh, look at me, I'm doing that thing again.
Yeah.
Sounds like what you're suggesting is that the effort is worth it because I'm worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're learning to call up the best parts of you in a given moment.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Okay. So, Corey, are you actively working with folks?
I am.
Are you taking clients on?
I am
Okay, and how do you work with folks?
generally by the phone, and if it's a time zone that's far enough away, then out of the country or whatever, we'll do usually do Zoom.
Okay, and what do you offer them?
A lot of times people want to do an introductory session. Most people choose like a package of 3 or a package of 6 because it gets a little cheaper per session if they have a greater commitment to their own process. And it seems like every couple weeks or every 3 weeks is a nice tempo because there's generally a lot of things to think about,
To
a little
work through,
homework to
yeah.
do, some practices to see if you can apply, and it gives us some more information to start off with our next session.
Right. So you are doing coaching,
That's right. That's
actively
right.
coaching individuals, couples, both?
Both, both.
Okay.
I would, it definitely is weighted towards single people. My most typical client is a woman who's anywhere from 35 to 70, and she's single but doesn't want to be single forever, and she doesn't also want to repeat the same crap that she's experienced in the past. She wants to do it differently this time. And so she's interested in preparing herself to meet someone special, to be someone more integrated and able to be connected to her own value and affirm that value in her everyday interactions. And then
Gotcha.
also, as I said before, I have a lot of couples who typically have had a long sex drought and they want to return to intimacy, but they don't know where to start.
All right. So you coach on sexual intimacy as well as just communication and
Yes.
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know. Does tantric process play any part in that, or
Yeah,
is it
it
okay?
does. It does. Yeah. And that's really starts with an intimacy in your own heart. Yeah.
Great. All right. So how do people get a hold of you? How do they find you?
Well, I have a website, corerelationship.com, and my book Soul Statements is on Amazon. So my email is on my website. My book is on my website also. And so that's how people get a hold of me.
All right. And so just to clarify, you're not doing psychotherapy or counseling, you're offering coaching only. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes,
All
correct.
right. Just want to let folks know. Well, thank you very much for chatting with me,
It's
and
been a pleasure, Wendy.
I hope you sell a zillion books.
I would love that because I know just how chock full of useful tips and tools the book is. So I love imagining how much help it's doing out there in the world.
Effective communication truly is an art form. If you'd like to learn more about Corey's work or check out his book, Soul Statements, please visit his website, corerelationship.com. Thank you so much for listening. Fingers crossed it doesn't take another 8 years to get the next episode out to you. But if it does take a while, please know it's likely because I'm up to my eyeballs getting shit done in order to reopen Lucid Path Wellness in February of 2024. I have to-do lists of to-do lists. I've included a link to my website in the show notes if you're curious about the harmonic ellipse energy therapy chamber. It's all very exciting. Well, that does it for this episode. I hope the rest of your day is highly pleasant. Until next time.